So I'm going to take you through a journey today and give you a couple of tasks to do. And it'll be interesting. So I've heard at least two of you are based somewhat in Karlsruhe, and that's interesting because one of the things we're going to look at today is air pollution and some of the significance that has for health. The other task is I'll try ask a question, and please free to put anything else in the chat so we can deal with in discussion. What's really important here is that we hear your voice in the discussion. My voice is not so important. I'm really just trying to ignite a discussion for you. So what's the value of this? This is by Klein. It's 1951, if I'm not incorrect. It's a work of art. You will find it. I've actually seen another version of this, which was absolutely spectacular. So it's a composition in blue by Klein. What's the value? Can anybody try guess the value? You can just put it into the chat. Ah, okay. I'll be more clear. What's the numeric value of this? What do you think? Guess postmodern art. How much do we think it's worth? Oh my God. Okay. You really value art. Okay. But, you know, in terms of value for something which is just a composition in blue. And when you get up close to it, as I have been once, you will see the texture in it. It's actually amazing. The value is just over $2.5 million US. Here's a question for you, which I've heard it. It's an urban myth. And the urban myth is that somebody was asked in an exam the question, what is a risk? They were told to answer it as succinctly as possible. So can you just put into the chat, you know, maybe a couple of words that you could use to describe, you know, maybe it could be one sentence to describe what is a risk. I'll give you a whole sentence. I'm not even telling you how many words you can use. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do this because I know the answer could be written in about 4, but it's just one answer, and there are many. I like that uncertainty of something bad. Love to know the value system on bad. That's okay. Danger, yeah. Undesired outcome. I like that. Where you don't know whether the outcome will be favorable. Everything. That's a really good answer, actually. So I'll just let one or two more of you contribute. Where the outcome is not certain. I guess that's everything when we entered. We're a year into COVID-19 now. Leave it blank, doing nothing. Ooh, you're not far wrong. I'm not surprised, you know, that we're getting the type of insights here, you know, everything, doing nothing. So I'll give you the example, and thanks for your contributions. This is the answer that the fable says was given. This is a risk. And undoubtedly that is a risk, you know, it's being cheeky, I guess, but it's funny. I like the idea that we're looking at a concept of less. Because if we look at both the college exam question and what I think is a really fine work of art, less is more. So the concept of less being more, less being better, is an interesting question in the light of sustainability and the UN SDGs. And we'll probably bookend our talk a little bit with the UN SDGs. So that's just some context. These are the challenges, and again, I'm going to give you a question. I can quote some of the sources, even there are many sources here. So IPCC for climate change, the air pollution research is by one of our co-authors recently published a paper across over 100 European cities on air pollution, and a number of people on our projects are working on looking at air pollution in the European context. Aging population is identified European trend, rapid urbanization. Just to give you a contrast, if you're wondering what was happening in the US elections and why the United States is so divided, I'm half American, so I guess I'm half Irish, I'm divided too, is because it has a really different demographic than we do in Europe. So Europe, in most countries, 70% of Europeans live within an urban or a peri-urban context, and in the US it's actually divided, pretty much urban, rural, 50-50. So there are interesting differences we have in Europe to other continents, and obviously Asia would be quite different again. So we have this rapid urbanization, we have increased density, and it's the urbanization, it's the Habitat 3 document suggests that there's a win by bringing people together and coalescing resources. But undoubtedly there's challenges of inequality around that. We know the climate change challenges, biodiversity loss and degraded environments is a major issue. And that's even linked to zoonosis, which is one of the possible reasons for the emergence of COVID-19. I didn't put down COVID-19 here, but if you read the 2019 World Economic Risks Report, a global cardiovascular pulmonary pandemic was listed in the top 5 risks. So what we're going through at the moment, and I'm going to use particular language around it, is we're now at the tail end of a global pandemic. I'm just trying to be a little bit optimistic. The impact of air pollution we look at again, but it is significant. And I think we can estimate it, and these estimates are very difficult to do, is that it accounts for between 500,000 and 800,000 additional deaths in Europe annually. That's fairly vast, and just the gap between those two statistics tell you something about how difficult it is to make or quantify the impact. Sedentary lifestyles, I'm not going to go into it, but it's physical inactivity is something that Karina and others have expertise on. But if we're trying to promote activity, what type of activity are we trying to promote? Is it in light of these other problems, or is it going to be the typical gym fix? Mental illness is a fairly clearly documented problem. Give an example, in 2004, it was predicted that by 2020 it would be the 4th greatest global cause of disease, so greatest burden of disease, so by 2020. So I have a question for you, because you have lots of knowledge and we all inhabit the same planet. So my question is this: which has the greatest burden of disease? And honestly, there's almost a race among these. So if you go to a talk by one research group, they'll tell you it's X, and if you go to another group, they'll tell you it's Y. But there is some evidence suggests that of these, one of these right now is the greatest burden of disease, or up until at least COVID times. So just try put your answer into the chat. Biodiversity loss, mental illness, all good answers. I'll just let a few further answers come in. Climate change, air pollution, climate change. Okay, great, climate change. If we were doing this in Mentimeter, climate change would be winning, okay? Biodiversity loss. What's interesting as a psychologist, and I'm a former practitioner psychologist, so I'd have worked within sport teams. And working within elite sport, I would have had to understand systems thinking, is that, we coexist within the system. So on one level, I can tell you that in 2017, the WHO said the greatest burden of disease is actually depression, not just depression, irrespective of other issues of mental illness and anxiety. So depression alone is the greatest, according to the WHO in 2017. But it's not a race, because these are not entirely unrelated. And that's a really important theme. So if you take one idea away from today, it's the fact that there's interdependencies amongst these major global challenges. And if we're to address them and flip them into opportunities, again, we have to do it in an interconnected way. We have to take a different approach, perhaps, than one which has been applied before. So let me just take you a step further and we're going to have a look a little bit at the solutions. Now, this is the one word you're going to become familiar with today, which is NBS, nature-based solutions. So these are inspired and supported by nature. They're predicted to be cost effective, but that's a question of evidence, and simultaneously provide environmentally, social and economic benefits and help build resilience. And being a psychologist, I was very interested in, you know, how they define resilience. They're really talking about, you know, resilience within ecosystems against climate change, against severe weather, against drought, against air pollution, using the, you know, the right type of plant species in the city, for example. But the primacy of these approaches, and I'll just give you some examples, and we'll see an image in a few minutes to convey this. This might include green corridors. It might be include what we call SUDs, or, you know, specialized urban drainage systems with different plants to reduce flooding. They might include green walls and green roofs, and they can be designed to mitigate against for example, urban heat island effects, which we get in cities as a result of climate change increasingly. They might mitigate air pollution. It could be different tree barriers, etc. So it's interesting that, you know, this is primarily driven by a huge wealth of expertise over the last 15 or 20 years, and a huge investment by a European Commission, as we'll see, to deal with we'll call it ecosystem challenges, so ecosystem benefits. And the primary winner here is designed to be the natural environment and the urban environment. So using nature in a city to help make a city more livable, or focus on enhancing its environmental health. Now, you can see in the image down below, they say human well-being, biodiversity benefits. So in the talk earlier today, I heard that at least 50% of the projects in this area, when they did a global review, you know, aim to enhance human well-being. And I'm asking myself, what are the other 50% aiming to do? Are they actually, you know, negating or not interested in enhancing human well-being? And the reason we say that is because as psychologists, we know that, you know, people's habits and attitudes towards such interventions can, you know, can support in a reciprocal way, you know, future implementation. Maybe you get people interested through citizen science. Maybe you change the investment profile within cities, so people start to invest in trees. For example, in the city of Sheffield, I heard today that a tree is valued at approximately 325,000 pounds sterling. Depending on where it is, it could be up to $500,000. So we might look upon trees in the city a little bit differently if we look over a 20-year life cycle of what their role is in enhancing human health and promoting biodiversity. The European Commission has invested 280 million in nature-based solutions in the past 5 years, and this is only going to increase. So if you're looking for a funding stream, it's not a bad way to go. That's just a subtle hint. So the question behind or underlying our project is, how can nature-based solutions contribute to health? So we're talking about human and environmental health. It's an 11.14 million 4-year project with 40 partners across 18 different countries. And we've got links to Beijing to try and understand what they're trying to do there, and links to Mexico City, trying to understand how, for example, 2 mega cities deal with these issues. So essentially, if you start from here, we're looking at nature-based solutions, which is essentially a green corridor. That's really the green infrastructure we're using. We're focused on 4 things. Grow, which is nature-based enterprises, and actually making sure that there's an economic side to this to promote implementation and support it. We're looking at digital innovation, and that includes virtual reality, which I didn't go into much detail on, but I can talk about after. It includes an online learning or know framework. So we're going to basically give people nuggets or bytes of information to try shape their habits and their knowledge around nature in cities. And, you know, obviously it has a sustainable physical activity dimension, which includes active travel, green exercise, and restorative spaces. That means nature for recovery, for example. I will try to give you an example of what it'll look like. It does work across 6 European cities. This is an example of what we're trying to do and it shows the complexity. So we're trying to measure positive environmental factors. So as you'll see in a few moments, we normally look at the environmental features of a city in a very mechanistic way. We have an environmental quality index, typically one from the US Environmental Protection Agency, which gives a score which is really about the risk. It's a composite score for different pollutants. And that's a quite, a narrow lens to use to understand nature in your city or the natural environment. Is it doing harm to you? So we're part of, I guess, it's probably a 20-year-old paradigm, which is looking more at the benefits of nature. So we're measuring positive environmental factors, including, good air quality, natural soundscape, and I'll put a link in the chat about that in a moment. And we're looking at urban tree canopy cover. We're trying to promote not cycle lanes in the typical way, but more which the way it is in Germany, for example, where you've got segregation a lot between vehicular traffic and cycle traffic. We're looking at person-based sensors and monitoring, not just to gather data, but actually also to gather data in a way that it can change people to become data collectors, to becoming decision makers. We're trying to influence the microclimate, and we're trying to assess the climate resilience of different species. So this is some of what we're trying to do. And this is to mitigate some of the risks in the city we get from, we call the co-hazards of noise and air pollution. Ultimately, we're trying to promote human and environmental health. Most of the projects over the previous 5 years of huge investment by the European Commission have been focused on promoting environmental health with probably human health in brackets, if I was to give my opinion on it. Now, what I'd like to just focus on next is, what does this mean? Now, what it means is for us to deal with these issues in a connected way, in a holistic approach, we can't use singular paradigms. So we have to use a transdisciplinary approach. So we have to have researchers from different disciplines. And just so you know what transdisciplinarity is, it means that instead of using like converging evidence for multidisciplinarity work, what we do is we stack the lenses together, we create a new method. And we have a number of new methods in the project. For example, we have an environmental quality index, which includes both positive and negative features of the environment. As you'll see in a moment, we also have a multidimensional model of health. But this can only coexist within the framework, and the framework we're given by the UN is pretty good. Now, if you're aware of the UN SDGs, there are 17 targets with many goals and outcomes. For example, UN SDG 11 has a goal 11.7 to increase the access to green space within 300 meters of your house. You should have, or 5 minutes walk, it's estimated to be, that you have access to high quality green space. And that would be a universal target. And that's quite challenging, but interesting because it shows we are valuing green space by doing that. Now, COVID highlights obviously a number of issues. Inequality, because certain classes and certain communities are more at risk. And that's often due to where they live and long-term air pollution and many other social factors. And we'll see on the task in a moment how this relates to air pollution. But COVID gives us either a shadow, or coming out of the shadow, it gives us an opportunity to shine a light on what's important to us. And Mark Newhausen, one of the researchers who work, you'll see in a moment, he describes it as giving us, certainly during lockdown scenarios with reduced traffic congestion, it often gives us a window into a carbon neutral city, which up until now has been pretty much a theoretical concept. Certainly during strict lockdowns, it was quite interesting to see that. At least during summertime, it's perhaps different during winter. It highlights that there's a resilience and a capacity for sudden response. So the idea that we use behavior change models in the same traditional way we had over previous decades of research is probably gone. Not that it's not useful, it's that in light of a major trauma or a challenge, people can change their behaviors really, really quickly. And it takes about 30 to 60 days to form a habit. And many of the habits we have about hand washing are going to continue well beyond COVID-19 scenarios. So, you know, we will have that forever. Sneezing into our elbow, these things are now well-formed habits, and they perhaps weren't previously. Nature is now perhaps going to be more central in our lives. And we know there's a European Green Deal, which has that at its core. We know there's a European Biodiversity Strategy 2030, which puts nature at the fore as well. I'm just going to give you an example around this. One thing is impact measurement will be key. You know, we have to use measures which allow the evidence and the findings to be translated into policy really quickly. Now, I'll just give you one criticism on that. It doesn't mean we apply an RCT in every time, because there's a complex interventions framework, which is probably more appropriate than an RCT, because RCTs are really good for drug trials, for vaccines, but not really good at looking at these complex issues. So there are many other ways we can look at this. So I'll just give you one example and take you through it. So I'd like you to check the air quality in your city. Karina, you can put that link in of air quality. I'm not sure if it comes up here, sorry.
Yes, I can put it in the chat.
Please, thanks. So I'd like you to check the air quality in your city. And I've lived in Munich, as Karina knows, and I've seen during temperature inversion how poor the air quality can be there. I've also lived in London, where we have what we call the Hyde Park effect. So if you just take a few moments and check the air quality in your city, and you can then maybe put in the scores into the chat, and we can have a quick look. One of the reasons about air quality is, you know, nature-based solutions have a clear capacity to promote good air quality. There are many other complex factors that have to be engaged in this. And for example, you also have some risks. And I don't just mean it could be pollen from a species of tree, but you actually have canyon effects or street canyon effects, whereby you actually limit the capacity of the pollutants to disperse. But it's really important to understand, right? So the micropollutants we're talking about, so 2.5 micrograms, PM 2.5 particulate matter, there are no safe levels. The EU level is 40 micrograms per annum, and that's the comparable number you'll get from that link. Is it coming up? I just might put in Dublin, okay, my own, where I'm living now. Is that okay? Can you still see my screen? Thanks. Okay, if I put in Dublin metropolitan area, we'll see what we're going to get to see here. Okay, so air pollution, NO2, is not, that's actually still not so good, given that it maybe not too bad, but we're also looking at mean data here. Okay, so during times of temperature inversion, Dublin suffers like many other cities. Dublin also has, I think ranked fourth in Europe, fourth globally for traffic congestion in 2018. So it has some inherent problems, which maybe aren't captured here. For PM 2.5, it's not so bad, but actually more than 50% of the cars in Ireland are diesel. And the deaths that could be avoided if the lowest levels of air pollution were met are 201 and 206. And this causes great, chat between Mark Newhausen, the lead researcher on this, and our team. And one way to look at this is, if we're only looking at deaths, these are primarily to do with pulmonary disease, whereas actually cardiovascular disease may count for a much larger amount of deaths relating to air pollution. Now, just take two co-hazards. Noise pollution, it's a stressor, it's indirect. So it's not that it hurts your ears, it's that it gives you this background high level chronic and pervasive stress. Air pollutants can cross a blood-brain barrier. They can reduce your cognition. So in North America, there are limits on how close a school can be to an interstate, because of the impact that's been demonstrated, or the associations between lower SAT scores and high levels of air pollution. So it's just important in context to have a look. So Bern 12.4, 26, That's okay. It's a little high on NO2, and I'm sure you do get temperature inversion there. So the peaks may be much worse. It's also how proximal are you to areas of high air pollution. If you have large green space near where you live, that can be a major positive factor. 28 for Karlsruhe, okay, 28.3. Okay, so this for sure is definitely a risk factor. The NO2 doesn't look so great, but if you also go online and have a look what the peaks are, you'll also know, have your own decision-making tree when it's good to go for a run outdoors. So we call the Hyde Park effect suggests that in times of high air pollution, it's really important that you run in a green space, what we call a clean air route, because otherwise you are has a risk of contraindication of the effect of running. The evidence around this isn't so strong when I say that. It actually has to do with people with COPD. But I'm Irish, and Ireland and the UK, we have a very high level asthma. So we have at risk factors. It means we shouldn't be running in high levels of air pollution. And the effect of these pollutants it's associated, that's probably the best way I can put it, with higher incidence or risk of neurodegenerative disease and cognitive impairment. So just like lead many years ago was the challenge in fuel emissions, we have a challenge with NO2 and PM 2.5. So just to look at the thinking, what does this give us? Well, I tried to put this in as big as I can, but I thought I would be on the left of the screen, so I hope you're able to see it. So our way of thinking about these interdependent, interrelated challenges is to use a multidimensional model of health. So, we're obviously, if we take air pollutants, we know that there's an impact upon cognition. So we have cognition and performance. Now, what are the measures of cognition and performance? Well, when you're not a student, it's typically like things like absenteeism. If you are working in a company like one maybe about a mile from here is Hewlett-Packard, another mile is Intel. So if you work in these companies, you've got like a productivity index. So often quantifiable in manufacturing, for example, are many different parameters which relate to your cognition and performance. Mental health and well-being, well, there's a major link between air pollution and rate of antidepressant medication prescribed in particular communities for many different factors, but these are at least associated with high levels of air pollution. Sleep is a really good indicator for mental health and well-being, not just the duration of sleep, the sleep quality, the sleep timing. Nutrition, whether you're using getting sustainable nutrition or you've got a good variety in your diet, and you've got adequate nutrition. Physical activity, we know, is central to our lives, but we're also interested in where do you conduct that physical activity. If you drive to a park and you go run in green space, you might call that green exercise. But by driving to the park, it may no longer really clearly be described as sustainable physical activity because you put a large carbon footprint cost onto doing that exercise. We know that social community health is important, and we know that attitudes towards sustainability are important actually right now in Europe because such positive attitudes towards sustainable growth. So it's actually, it's to be part of, of a movement. It gives people identity. We think this is quite important, that people feel that they're agents of change and not mere respondents. And this kind of hints at something I can just tell you. So if you think back the last time that you heard an announcement, and I can just finish on this, which was about, washing your hands or doing, not traveling, only doing essential journeys. If you think how that message came to you, it probably came in a very didactic format, almost like an order. You must do this for the community, for the locality, for your own health. What we know in psychology is that motivation is primarily determined by autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So if we're to make changes in cities, at a high rate of speed, we need to preserve autonomy amongst the communities. We need to make sure that people are knowledgeable or they're competent in their decision making. And we need to ensure that there's relatedness. In other words, that this is a shared vision. And that's really where the UN SDG framework helps us have an overall view of this. So I'll just go to discussion now. Thank you.